presentation for the final project in chemistry. So I'm going to be talking about the environmental impact of mining, and the major topic of that is going to be pollution. So what's actually happening? Mining is important because it helps us obtain metals and minerals, which can be used in electronics, construction, battery, pretty much anything. And then since the population is increasing, the demand is also increasing for these materials. The only problem is that mining pollutes by stripping the land. So it's polluting the water sources and releasing toxic chemicals into the environment. Who's benefiting from mining? So pretty much everybody benefits from mining. Everyone from the U.S. to the mining companies themselves to different tech companies and pretty much any company. And I have a few of them up here. So we got the U.S., BHP, which is a mining company, Apple, Ford, and then some other mining companies as well as Tesla. So what are the effects? Currently, deforestation, soil erosion, and toxic runoff into lakes are huge, as well as the displacement of communities. So this can be indigenous or just communities around that lose their houses because of the mining companies. Later on, though, it can have even worse effects like greater carbon emissions if the mining practices don't improve. We could have a scarcity of clean water because of the acid runoff into the lakes and streams. And then we could even have permanent destruction of ecosystems if this continues. So what areas of the world are affected the most? Anything can be affected by mining if there is mining there. But some of the bigger areas in the world are the Congo in Africa, so the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is over here in this picture. South America, especially Brazil and Chile, have a lot of mining going on, and then Australia is actually the global leader in mining. So those have a huge effect. What institutions are helping versus hurting this cause? So mining companies, obviously. And then especially mining companies who kind of like to cut corners to save costs. So some examples of this is Rio Tinto, which is a really big mining company, and then South Fork Coal, which actually has a lawsuit for running off into lakes. And then some companies that are helping is like environmental NGOs, so different nonprofits that help improve the environment. Some that I listed here were Earthworks and Greenpeace, as well as the government. The U.S. actually does a very good job implementing laws that help keep the environment safe and put the liability on the mining companies themselves to continue to keep the environment safe. So what are some alternative options we can look to stop pollution from these mining companies? So recycling, both urban mining, which is like recycling old electronics, and just recycling any metals instead of mining new ones. This is just going to stop us from having to mine as much because we'll just keep reusing the materials. And then improving mining technology. This is going to minimize land and water damage. Pros and cons. So the pro of recycling is obviously it's going to reduce the pollution because we're not going to need new mining as much. The only problem with this is we have a limited supply, and it can be really challenging to extract the material that you need from it, like the metals. And then better mining practices. So a pro of this is obviously less damage to the surface. One problem is that we can still, even if we have the best mining practices, we could still cause some damage to the underground and especially the water. And then another thing is it's going to be more expensive to get new equipment. So the best course of action, one would be to push stronger laws for environmental, especially internationally, because the U.S. does do a pretty good job of this, but places like the Congo and especially South America don't do as great of a job. helping the environment in that area. And then also recycling metals, making it more accessible to recycle metals, as well as incentivizing both the companies and consumers, whether that's through tax breaks or just cash, just incentivizing to recycle these metals. So then, as for the science concepts, one thing that we talked about in class was oxidization. So oxidization actually happens when air and water hit whatever the minerals or the rocks. So once they're exposed to the air and water, this leads to oxidization. And as you can see down here, we have the pyrite, and once it's hit by the oxygen and water, it produces acid. And so the problem with this is the acid runoff gets into rivers and lakes, and this can kill the wildlife as well as just making drinking water no longer drinkable. And then a similar process here is leaching. So leaching is when mining companies try and get any of the low grade ores off of the metals that they're wanting. So say you want gold. Here we have an example of gold. So gold is going to react with cyanide and oxygen to form a gold cyanide complex, which is soluble in water. So you're basically taking gold and trying to get it away from the rocks that you don't want and make it in its pure form. This process is also, although this process can increase efficiency, cyanide spills or acid leaks during the leaching process can poison ecosystems and the drinking water. So kind of a similar problem as before. The byproducts of these things can cause problems to the environment. And if you want to stop and pause, you can read these charts on the side and they'll kind of explain it a little bit better. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks so much for tuning into my final project.